Okay, hello and welcome to episode 31 of the Rhody Rumble podcast. My name is Adam Bernstein. Today, this episode will be a little bit different. There's a lot going on with Rhode Island athletics right now between the men's soccer team cruising through the A10 tournament, football season wrapping up in the CAA, the men's and women's basketball starting up this week. So there's no better guest to bring on than Stone Freeman to talk about it all. How you doing today, Stone?
I'm doing really well, Adam. Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be able to talk about all these sports on campus in Kingston, and I'm really excited to be. I think this is my second time on the podcast, so thanks for having me again.
Yep, I was actually going to say you're actually the first guest that I'm bringing on for the second time around. So I
Wow,
appreciate you agreeing to come back on such short notice.
excellent. Yeah, please, anytime. I'm a big fan of yours, and
Thank you.
doing this is a privilege. So yeah, I'm all ears.
I appreciate that. Before we get started, I'm really curious. I don't know if we talked about your new role with Rhody Sports Properties, but you want to just talk about how that's going so far?
Yeah, no, it's excellent. I had an opportunity. I got a call in July that Nick Bodzioni, who had my position before me, was taking a different position outside of sports, and Devin Berg, who's the general manager of Rhody Sports Properties, Matt Swiss, who's one of the coordinators, and there were some other folks in the athletic department had thought of me, and I was really eager to take it. Rhody Sports Properties is essentially the corporate sponsorship wing of URI Athletics, so I'm doing a lot with the behind the scenes of athletics, which I'm really enjoying that side. I'm really enjoying being in the building every day and getting to work with some coaches and administrators on a daily basis, and just helping the university's athletic department grow. It's a very small role in what is a big operation. But to be here, my goal was to get a job after I got my master's degree, and to have that job, at the University of Rhode Island inside the athletic department every day is just honestly exactly what I need right now, and it's really helped me out grow as an individual, and that's where we're at now. We're in men's basketball season, women's basketball season, that crossover with football, like I know we're going to talk about today. So things are hectic, but it's always a good time of year. So I'm really excited. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat about that.
Of course. I actually want to start with men's soccer
Sure.
because last night we're recording this on Sunday afternoon, so the day after the quarterfinals, Rhody won 3-1 at home against Davidson. They're now advancing to the semifinals. This is something that this program is really used to going back to the tournament year after year. And as they prepare for the next game, whether that be number 3 St. Joe's or number 6 Duquesne, we're waiting on that game today. How do you think they'll prepare for this next game against either of those teams?
Yeah, what I've learned over the course really of my time in Kingston is that it's death, taxes, and URI men's soccer making it to the semifinals. I mean, this is a familiar spot for Gareth Elliott's teams. I called the game last night with Will Pipicelli on ESPN Plus, and kind of as I'm diving in, I think Davidson's a really good program, and Mike Babst is their head coach, and he ran a powerhouse at the University of Chicago, certainly a team that wants to do more, but they were on the other side of things. They traditionally have never won a game in the Atlantic 10 tournament. And again, they're new to the conference in 2014. So they're 0-3 coming into a game like that. Rhode Island, 11-4 in A10 tournament games with Gareth Elliott. And the last time, obviously 2020 was kind of a weird year because you play your season in spring 2021. But you have this crazy run now at URI men's soccer between 2014 and now. They've been to the semifinals or finals in each of those years, with the exception of the spring 2020 season. And they've won, outside of the COVID year, back-to-back A10 tournaments. So you go into this game, and like you said, there's kind of that. We're still waiting to see at this point of our recording who they're going to play. But I've just come to learn that Gareth Elliott has his teams prepared. I mean, a team that's picked to finish 7th in the conference finds himself at number 2. And St. Louis is really good. They're the top seed, and I think too, to a certain degree, they are in a league of their own. The Billikens this year are really good, and they put an investment into their soccer programs over the last few years, and it's definitely paid its dividends. But a school like Rhode Island has just made its mark internationally recruiting, and also doing a lot through the transfer portal. So to answer your question, I think they'll be prepared as they have been each of the last, 2 to 3 Atlantic 10 tournaments that they've been in. That they belong there. It's a constant. It's an expectation in their program to be there. And now you just got to wait to see what happens in this next weekend coming up in St. Louis. They just lost to the Billikens 3-1, so I'm sure they're still thinking about that. But I know they'll be focused that they have to get through the semifinals before they can touch the finals. But they look like a team that could certainly, string together a couple more wins and find another NCAA tournament berth in there.
For sure. You kind of answered this next question in your last answer, but with the success that the program has seen in recent years and just this team, in general this season, what do you think has led to their success? You mentioned the transfer portal. You mentioned recruiting, stuff like that. But really, what has Coach Elliott, in your eyes, what have you seen that he's done that has led to the success in all the years that he's been here so far?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Gareth Elliott, and his resume speaks for itself, but this guy that's been an A-10 winner as a player at Rhode Island, as an assistant coach, and now as a head coach. There's the one side of it, right, that he's a Rhode Island guy in terms of college, right? He was born in Ireland, but he understands it, right? And being that international background now here in Rhode Island, now, of course, raising and growing his family here too, but he just gets it. And the transfer portal in most sports, right, those bigger sports like football and basketball, I think has taken a hit, right? A lot of people are shying away from it. But what you'll see in particular in Olympic sports is schools that can navigate it, right? And you might lose a player or two to it, but if you can pick players up from the transfer portal, you can see growth really, really right away. And I think Rhode Island saw this, right? So you got a guy like Patrick Ajimine that comes from a Division III school in Eastern Connecticut State, but a D3 All-American, and looks like he's playing at an All-American level now here at Rhode Island. He had 2 goals last night. So he understands that transfer portal, but then to help him internationally, it makes it really, I shouldn't say easy, but those conversations with players that are coming from outside of America, I would assume, and again, I'm from Rhode Island, so I'm a bad person to speak on this, but I would assume if you ask Coach Elliott, he's been in that situation before, right? He's been a guy that's been recruited to play in America at a smaller state institution like Rhode Island. So when he's having those conversations, it's kind of like, to use a basketball analogy with our men's basketball team, why Dave Cox does a really good job in the DMV area, right? Because that's where he's from. He's from Washington, D.C. So when you're getting pitched, when you're getting these coaches that are making pitches for you to come to their university, it's not just a random dude talking to you. It's a guy that's been there and now has successfly continued what he was a part of as a player and assistant coach in his own program. In the last 9 years for Rhody men's soccer has just really been not only successful, but again, it's become the constant that they belong as a top 8 team in the Atlantic 10. They belong in a semifinals weekend already and fighting for an NCAA tournament berth.
100%. I think what you just mentioned there, taking the other perspective, especially on recruiting, Coach Elliott has done this himself. So when he has those conversations and when he sits down with someone who's looking to transfer, someone who he's looking to recruit, you mentioned Patrick Ajimine. I mean, you said it yourself. He was all over the box score last night with 2 goals and an assist. He has 25 points on the season. Whether it's him or someone else, personally, I've been a fan of Isaac Estese, who's also an international player. Has impressed me a lot this year. Couple of Rookie of the Week honors under his belt already. 6 goals. He had I think one of them as well was yesterday. 3 assists. Whether it's him or Ajimine, what do you expect from this team, Mike? Who do you think they'll go to in these big games or these close game situations to get them a goal, especially heading into the semifinals weekend?
Well, we talked about this last night on the broadcast too, Will and I. If you look at those 2 forwards that you mentioned, Ostese and Ajimine, again, 2 guys that are 2 different. One comes from the transfer portal, one a true freshman. One an American player that played at Eastern Connecticut State, one internationally, right? So there alone are all these storylines coming together. I think, too, though, what can't be overlooked is the significance of Stefan Schmidt in goal. I mean, he has become, again, we talk about constants, right? He is a constant for URI soccer, a constant presence. And of course, he gets the benefit of a COVID year, right? He comes back, but he wasn't here in the spring season because he was back home in Germany, and because of travel restriction and whatnot, he wasn't in America. But he hasn't lost a step, and he commands a presence on the field, right? He's vocal, he's loud, he's been there before, right? He's another guy that you can't overlook. When you have so much trust in your goaltender that he's starting every game. No other goaltender has even registered a minute this season. It's been Stefan's goal, right? that provides a certain sense of confidence, right? It's almost like having a good quarterback, right? A quarterback that's been there before. If you can trust the guy under center knows what's going on, usually that kind of feeds off of everybody else. So offensively, you have these two forwards that represent a true freshman, a redshirt junior, and then in goal on the defensive end, you have a guy that's been here at Rhode Island for 5-6 years, it seems like now. These are what the constants in your program help get, right? They help get constants on the field. So that excellence, that drive, all these things we're kind of talking about, now we see it play over. So definitely think about Schmidt going into next weekend, right? He's been to 2 NCAA tournaments before. He's won 2 Atlantic 10 championships before. So he's been in net twice in these big games where in the A10, right, it's really – St. Louis might be the difference maker this year. Right? You know, if a Rhode Island or a St. Joe's or somebody goes in and does win the A10 tournament, St. Louis is probably going to get an at-large bid. But by and large, the A10 is a one big conference. Schmidt's been there before in 2 situations where you win or you go home. And right now, I mean, you need your best players to show up, and I think Schmidt will be one of those guys going forward this weekend that Rhode Island will rely heavily on.
Absolutely. Feeding the star talent, which we've seen a lot this year. And just before I move on to, I think football was the next one I wanted to bring up. Just before I move on to that, you gotta think about what you just said. The depth of this team, offensively and defensively, and bringing up Stefan Schmidt was a great example of that. I don't even have his stats pulled up, but I've called a couple of the games, and he's up there in shutouts. So definitely having that experience on the team coming from his end, and also just the forwards in general, that will be what drives the success or the excellence going into this next weekend and hopefully the weekend after that.
That's exactly right. And again, St. Louis is not an easy place to play. And I think Rhode Island knows that, having just lost to them 3-1 on the road. But something about, and again, it's one of those things in sports that, you know, especially as a guy like myself that certainly did play college soccer. I didn't make it past, you know, recreational soccer here, but I would assume that's kind of on their minds too, is that, you know, we got to go right back to St. Louis. You got to win 2 games to continue your season. You're probably, if you get through your first round, you're probably going to get St. Louis again, right? You just lost to them 3-1. What do you play with now, right? You got some morale back on your side, right? You got a couple wins in your back pocket if you make it to next Sunday, and you know, you're coming off of 2 straight victories. We might get a completely different game in St. Louis. So we shall see. But yeah, definitely an interesting weekend for men's soccer coming up here.
Absolutely. Moving on to American football, URI football. It's been an interesting season. There's a lot to talk about. Opening up 5-0, then dropping 3 consecutive games, and then coming out on top yesterday over at FBS school on UMass. We come into the standings 6-3 behind James Madison, Villanova, William & Mary. But it's just crazy to think about how we were once FCS nationally ranked at one point this season. When I did one game, I think play-by-play against Delaware was the game. We came at the last second. It was B-Ball that blocked the punt. LB Max scooped it up into the end zone for the touchdown. We won that game. We came into that game, I think, 17th or 18th ranked. Now with 2 games left with New Hampshire and Elon, the Rams are they still legit? I mean, to think that they were ranked as high as 17th or 18th, and now, you know, they're going to finish over 500 with the win yesterday, but could they clinch a playoff spot, or is it kind of going to have to depend on these next 2 games?
I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. And I think Jim Fleming talked about this with the UMass broadcast yesterday at the end of the game. What they need to do now is just focus on getting back to winning, right? There's going to be some stuff very similar like an NCAA tournament for basketball, men's or women's, is that there is going to be some things that are out of your control, right? Because at the end of the day, it is a committee selecting, right? But the rule of thumb is 8 wins makes you comfortable, makes you watch the selection show on Sunday. There were some seasons, I think my senior year, we were 6-5, right? 6 wins, you know, you're not getting in. Even to a certain degree, 7-4 doesn't get you in. But 8-3 gets you to a point where that selection Sunday, which is now 3 weeks from today, you start, or 2 weeks from today, I'd have to go back and look, but you start to really look at that and go, okay, we have to watch today. And I think for Rhode Island's sake, after losing 3 in a row in the middle of your season where morale is down, and you quickly realize that 3 can turn into 6 like that if morale continues, to beat UMass, it doesn't matter if they're FBS, FCS, Division II, you know, a Big Ten team. It doesn't matter. To get the win there shows that we're not going to roll over yet. and we're still fighting here. Now, it doesn't mean 8-3 gets you in. It just means that our best chance of getting in, we have to be 8-3 because 7-4 ain't going to do it. So now you win that one, you take it one game at a time. At least we can still have these conversations. Now, next week, UNH is going to come in here, a well-coached team that may be at the bottom of the standings. Rams can't overlook it. And then if you do get through that, you got to go on the road, and theoretically you're playing a quote-unquote playoff game at Elon. So these next two games are pivotal because you just want this conversation to continue. I want to be sitting here, maybe not necessarily on this podcast, but having a conversation with you a week from today, and we can say, all right, you beat UNH, not a shoo-in for the playoffs, but now it at least makes Elon a game that significantly matters. And if I know Jim Fleming and his staff, it's trying to preach to their guys now that 3-game losing skid, listen, you can't go back and do anything about it now. Just like you couldn't do anything about when you were winning 5-0. 5-0, they were preaching, don't eat the cheese, right? Don't get up in the hype. You got to keep on your grind. That's what it is now. And I just know that theoretically speaking in the FCS level, 8 wins makes you pay attention to Selection Sunday, and that is still certainly in the cards for URI.
Absolutely. I mean, either way, finishing over 500 at least since I've been here for this program, you can't be disappointed or upset with this season. You just kind of have to take what you've learned this year and just go forward with the program. So, what are your takeaways from the season? What do you think Rhody fans have learned from season like this? And how do we take, this team and move forward for future years of this program?
Yeah, I think what people have to really think about, and again, and I know that especially Twitter will prove this point. I get it. I'm the Rhody football homer. But what people should really focus on is that the storylines about Rhode Island football have changed, right? But what hasn't changed is that you still haven't been to a playoff in over 30-something years, right? My favorite, way to kind of put this into perspective is, Bill Buckner hadn't happened the last time Rhode Island made a playoff, right? So there is still work to be done. But at least the narrative is starting to change, right? And I think it starts way back when you even hired Jim Fleming, right? And now Jim Fleming's been here since 2014, I think, right? So he's been here a while, but you need time at a school like Rhode Island. But there reaches a point now where you want that next level. And that's what we're saying about that FCS playoff, right? And I think Jim Fleming's thinking the same thing, and he alluded to it again in his post-game comments after UMass, right? You beat an FBS team, first time since 2000, all that matters, right? But what really matters is that those conversations externally with people thinking about the program, to have us sitting here on a podcast talking about potentially making a playoff, talking about what morale has changed, that all matters too, right? And that's something that contributes to success. I really believe that I think if the university as a whole, if the community as a whole, the state, for my money, has got to buy in more on a school like Rhode Island and its football program. But we saw it with men's basketball a couple seasons ago. I mean, a couple NCAA tournaments completely changes expectations. But really, for my money, the most important part is it changes morale. Something about Rhode Island just looks a lot stronger. And if the Rams, football-wise, can get this thing to a playoff, that is – it's a credit to Fleming and his staff, but it's also a sign that morale has changed. People are starting to pay attention. So I think that's probably my biggest takeaway here from a season like this is that, listen, you're going to fall on hard times, right? A 3-game losing skid happens, right? How do you react now? How do you react? How do the fans react? Better be there on senior day on Saturday because you need that win. And let's roll it over to a couple more wins and get this thing to a playoff.
Absolutely. And just what you were saying with morale, I mean, just taking my freshman year, which was fall of 2019, when I think we had maybe 2 wins. Like, people were leaving at halftime. People weren't showing up to the games. First couple of games this year, everyone was showing up. I mean, I don't think there was any room in the stands at all. But anyways, moving on to the last question I have about football, we can expect some of these players to receive some CAA postseason honors. I mean, when you look at some of these players that will receive honors, Kasim Hill, obviously, Justin Antrim, Ivory maybe, or maybe even Jordan Jones with 6 interceptions. Personally, I would probably go with Kasim Hill. Mobile quarterback. He's tacked up over 1,500 yards in the season. Also, I'd probably go with the tight end, Caleb Warren, who in my mind broke out this season, having second most targets on the team, receiving yards on the team, as well as 3 touchdowns, which I believe is the most in receiving this year. But, he's been fun to watch. These guys have been fun to watch. And obviously, like you said, now they're trying to make that push towards a playoff for morale purposes. But who, on the offensive end, when it comes to moving the chains on the offensive possessions, or even on the defensive end, in your mind has been the key players that you think will, get those CAA postseason honors?
Yeah, I don't know, because I'd have to look more exclusively at statistics, because that inevitably is what drives who gets postseason honors, right? So a number like 6 interceptions from Jordan Jones, that's enough for me to put him in a category where he could get a Defensive Player of the Year award. But also, I think it's more realistic for him to be, one of those first team all defensive players, right? On the other side of the ball for the offense, again, I can't say he'll get an accolade, right? I'd vote for him, though, is Justice Antrim. I mean, you got a guy here. Now, he didn't play yesterday against UMass, so, I know he's been banged up a little bit, but Kevin Brown goes down before the season even starts. The top running back, CAA Offensive Rookie of the Year in that abbreviated spring season, a transfer from UMass. Antrim, a guy that's been here forever now, a 4th or a 5th-year senior, averaging 80-something yards per game, has a couple 100-yard rushes. But what he did was he transformed the offense, because what could have been, well, our number one back went down, the guy that really moved the chains, right? That's how Rhode Island beat Villanova in that abbreviated season in the spring. There was no excuse. Antrim still showed up, that lunchbox mentality that Jim Fleming has brought to Rhode Island, and balled out. So with or without getting CAA postseason recognition, what he did get was Rhode Island in a position to win football games, and that's the most important part. Kasim Hill's probably in that category too, right? I think numbers-wise, there's probably 3 or 4 quarterbacks that have been better than I'm sure. But in terms of what he has brought to this team, right? He's 6-3 now. He didn't start one game, right? I think it came against Maine last time out. Pop Robinson started.
Yeah.
But as the starter, this year he's if we said they're 6-3, so he's 5-3 as a starter this year. 5-2 as a starter, because technically he didn't lose that. 6-2 because he beat UMass. I'm doing this in my head. 6-2 this year as a starter. 2-1 in the abbreviated season. I mean, to be 8-3 as a starting quarterback, and no team has beat him twice, too, right? He's got to win and a loss against Delaware. He's got to win and a loss against Villanova. So that's another guy that, again, numbers-wise, I can't tell you he's going to be an all-CAA player. But what I can tell you is that is what moves your program forward and allows you to win a game at UMass after losing 3 straight, is that you have these constants on football that show up and just ball out. And Caleb Warren's a great example. Ivory Frimpong, I think, has performed better than a lot of people thought. On the defensive side of the ball, it's some of these 50-year guys. Andre B-Ball, LB Mack, Evan Stewart has been great, the transfer from Rutgers, linebacker, and the secondary has been strong. So I can give you 10, 15 names. What really matters is that you have guys that have showed up, and where they could have rolled over now after losing 3 straight, have now had us in a conversation where we're talking about potentially, a lot of things going to fall their way, a postseason bid for the Rams.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to Coach Fleming and his staff and the recruitment that they've done. You mentioned a couple players that have transferred into the program. I think even Kasim Hill transferred in.
Right.
I don't remember where he was prior to URI, but he transferred in from a pretty good school. Even Kevin Brown Jr., who I know is out this season, but he transferred in from UMass. So it's about using the transfer portal, making these recruitment adjustments with, again, coach and his staff, and then bringing in these players that are going to come in and do their job. Evan Stewart, I think, is leading the team in tackles this year, transfer from Rutgers. Getting those big name players from these big name schools and them kind of all coming in. It's almost the opposite of the men's basketball team last year. You had guys come in from Maryland. The lack of chemistry wasn't there. I know we'll get into the men's basketball team, but really just the way that they've molded and the chemistry in that locker room. I mean, it can't go unnoticed why they went 5-0 going into this season, or at the start of this season. So again, it all goes back to the recruitment that they've done, and Coach Fleming, I think, earns a lot of that respect.
Yeah, I think it's Coach Fleming. I think if you look at a guy, the recruiting coordinator, Mike Flanagan, who I'm biased towards because he's a Hendrick and Hawk as well, and actually was, getting interviewed by me as a senior in high school, as when he was an assistant football coach at Hendrick, and has just worked his way up, and he has really changed the recruiting side of things for URI. A couple new coordinators too, right? And I think Rhode Island had some success, offensively before, but to have Pat Murphy in here and a new set of eyes on the offensive side of the ball. Jack Cooper came from Nebraska, a young coach that brings a lot of energy on the defensive side of the ball. It's enough for Rhode Island to, you can see why they're winning football games, and it's because it's a good staff, it's a good roster, and now we're starting to see some tradition and some culture really start to show through. Culture goes unnoticed when you're not winning games, but the culture now at 6-3 is the same that Jim Fleming was dealing with when he was 2-10 in 2019. Same thing when his first year here when he's 1-10. I mean, these are situations that they take time to unfold, but Coach Fleming, that those three more feet type of mantras and things like that, that's been here for the last 8 years, right? Now we're starting to see with some time what can come around. And again, their expectations are higher. If you were interviewing Coach Fleming right now, he has a far different mindset than Stone Freeman does. But from the perspective of a fan and somebody that just loves this team and loves watching them, to be 6-3 right now and to sitting with a couple more opportunities at a playoff is certainly something to be proud of, something to be cognizant of.
Absolutely. I want to move on to women's basketball and then eventually men's basketball we'll wrap up with. But the team was picked to finish second in the A-10 conference. The Tammy Reese era just keeps getting better and better. She was coach of the year last year. What do you make of their success so far? What are your expectations for this upcoming season? Obviously, when you're picked to finish second in the A-10 conference, there's a lot of hype behind this team. I think a lot of people on campus aren't really picking up on just yet, but I mean, they are an exciting team to look forward to.
Yeah, the what's going to end up happening with women's basketball is starting on Tuesday, they'll be at Dartmouth, and then they play 2 games next weekend between Friday and Sunday. I'm not going to go into what I think is going to happen. I'm just going to say my logic is by this time next week, going into a Sunday matchup against, I think, like Coppin State at the Ryan Center, you'll start to see people talking about this. You'll start to see people really looking into URI women's basketball. Last year, to be a top 4 finish in the Atlantic 10, to get that double bye, but there's still plenty of work to be done. And again, this is where the coaches' mindsets are a lot different than the broadcaster's mindset like myself. But Tammy Reese's big thing is energy and pace and communication. And these things, honestly, just to be blunt, that you really hear traditionally at a Power 5 level. And what happens is fans hear it at a school like Rhode Island and they think, well, every once in a while they pay. No, these are things that coaches care about. And Tammy Reese has brought this mindset and this energy that is infectious. And I think people are really going to, come around to talking about them. I think there's more talk now than there has been before, but I think it's going to pick up some steam because Tammy's such a rounded person that's so easy to like. Same goes for her coaching staff. Same goes for her players, that it's hard to not root for them. And these first couple games, I know they're on the road. Then they get Merrimack at home, Coppin State at home. They play a non-conference tournament down at Virginia. They get a shot at Providence College. These are all going to prepare them for the A-10. But inevitably, this is a team that can win a conference championship. And I know that sounds as a shock to some people because historically there's only been one time that a women's basketball program has gone to the NCAA tournament at the URI, at URI. But largely these are constants. These are things we talked about with men's soccer. We're now talking about women's basketball, right? These are things that culturally now are ingrained in them. And that energy is something that the Rams, I think, can carry in. And we will certainly see this team really unfold in front of us.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, they open up the season Tuesday night at Dartmouth. But something I've really noticed about this team is just how deep they are of a team. Even off the bench, I mean, you have players like Emmanuel Tahan, who was player of the year co-player of the year, Atlanta 10 preseason all-conference first team, red shirt, Marie-Paul Foposi, who earned a spot on the second team, and then someone I've really enjoyed watching so far, who hasn't really played at URI yet, but the grad transfer from Seton Hall, Des Elmore, who ended on the third team. So, I mean, we're certainly seeing and starting to see the recognition from the rest of the conference that the Rams are getting in Kingston. But, Coach Reese does such a great job of just giving all of her players time on the court. And just like what you said, Stone, just the energy that she brings to all of the players. Talk about morale. I mean, the morale in that locker room has to be up, especially with all of the honors that they've gotten preseason and coming into the poll at second. But who do you really expect to be a breakout player this season or carry the load really on this team?
Yeah, I think Des, that you talked about, the transfer from Seton Hall, is going to play huge minutes, and I think she fits in perfectly with what MP and Tahan already kind of have. But also, what can't go overlooked is Marta Vargas. I mean, she's the last. I'd have to go back and double check, but I'm almost positive she's the last of the last coaching staff's kind of tenure here in Kingston. But she really has embodied exactly what Tammy's looking for, and I think Tammy sees that too. That she brings a unique perspective as somebody that's been here a while now and an international player, right? Tammy and her staff do a great job recruiting internationally too. So there's a culture barrier there too that this team has really managed to just take down, right? And everybody's committed to the same goal. But Vargas will be a great asset to the team, right, in terms of leadership. And I think MP and Tahan are kind of in the same category too, as they're high major transfers. They come here to a school like Rhode Island, but they've found their home, right? You don't look at your past when you're playing this well in the present. And I think that's what we're going to see is those two names are still the biggest on the team, the brightest on the team to a certain degree. And all these other transfers that Tammy Reese has managed to get to Kingston and also some of the true freshmen. Also, Catherine Caron's a sophomore now. These are contributing to the depth, contributing to the culture, and you'll start to see, again, this team kind of propel forward after the first couple of weeks of the season. They'll be turning some heads for sure.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up Marta Vargas because I actually wanted to bring her up as well. I did a couple of games my freshman year, so back in 2019. And she had a lot of minutes, but I think she had a season-ending injury that year. So we got a little bit of a glimpse of what she could do. And then last year with COVID, it was kind of hard to, watch the games and see what the women's team was doing. And obviously they were, succeeding a lot. But to bring her up and, her into the conversation, even as someone who could have a postseason honor if she, does her job, I think that will be, what flows for this team, the chemistry on this team. All four of the players that we just mentioned right there, five of the players we just mentioned right there. But really, what do you think this team – you kind of answered it already, but what do you think this team will necessarily need to do in order to continue to succeed?
I think what they're committed to basketball-wise is pace, is being conditioned, the stamina. And this is, again, it starts with Tammy in terms of the energy she brings, but it's also what these players that have now played 2 full seasons under Tammy have seen. And Marta's really the lone, and again, I'd have to crunch numbers, but she's really the lone example of that because MP and Emmanuel Tahan, they were both sitting out Tammy's first full year in Kingston, right? So Marta is the leader in terms of now for 3 years. And again, she did get hurt that year that you're alluding to, but last year, the year before that, into this year, the pace, the energy, that's something that has to carry over game after game. And I know Tammy preached how last year, there was, again, another barrier that every person in the world had to suffer through COVID. But for her sake, as a coach, there was a lot of positives of it just being a team, right? You're going into these environments. There's no fans. It's just you. The opposing team gives you a chance to really focus on yourself. Now you're going to go into a little bit more of a difference now or back to normal, right? And there's room for all that. But what you have to be cognizant of is what your team is going to bring to the court every day. And I think that's where that energy becomes critically, a little bit more important than in a year where there's an empty gym, right? That's where expectations become a little bit more important to you because there's a little bit more outside noise. So I think somebody like Marta, though, can lead the way in terms of leadership. Same thing with Emmanuel Tahan, same thing with MP Fapasi. These are players now that have done it for at least a year with Tammy Reese and know the expectation, know the energy levels that Tammy herself brings to practice. So or game days, what do they have to do when they're playing on the court? And I think that pace, that energy, that stamina, that conditioning, all that is going to end up paying dividends for Rhode Island.
I feel like that's a great transition to the men's team, which was what I was going to bring up next. Because you mentioned, the transfers coming in and a little bit of the issues that they suffered from last year. Of course, the injuries that impacted the rotation. We had Alan Betran, Makai Mitchell, Fats Russell, COVID, of course. No fans in the Ryan Center, and then the lack of chemistry, which I mentioned with all the transfers coming in. You have 2 guys from Maryland, you have a guy coming in from Towson, you have a guy coming in from Charlotte, and you have freshmen. It's tough, really, when you have a season like that. What do you think they need to avoid or need to do to avoid running into those problems again that they ran into last season?
Well, I think what's going to help a team like Rhode Island men's basketball and women's basketball too. This is actually I'm getting it from is Tammy brought this up, but a full off season is critically important. And last year, I don't know the exact timeline. Coaches would know it far better than I do, but I know Tammy Reese has really hit this point hard. But, they're not getting on campus last year until the school year starts, which is rare. Usually they're on campus in the summer, and they're not getting practices until 3 weeks before the season starts. That's almost never happened in modern day college basketball. So these full off seasons now, where morale's a little bit higher because teams know each other more so on the court, getting to know people is important in everyday life, right? And I'm sure a lot of these players spend a lot of time together, so that side of things is almost worked out, right? But on the court, getting to know certain players' strengths versus weaknesses, getting healthy, right? Alan Betrain's still hurt, but both Mitchells are now healthy. To get a true court general, now Fats Russell was great in every of his own rights when he was here, but Ish El-Amin brings just a new perspective, right? It's a new face. Getting to know him, getting to see how he's working. And then Ishmael Leggett is now in a new role, right? Now he's into the starting lineup. Getting that full offseason of mixing and matching both physically how somebody plays and also, emotionally who they are, all that matters. And probably more so than any in a sport like basketball, where, you look at a sport like baseball, right? There's 9 people out there on the field at the same time. Football, there's 11 people out there at the same time. Basketball and hockey too, for that matter. It's only you and 4 other guys out there, 4 other girls with you at the same time, right? How are you going to react in these moments where it's just you guys out there, right? And now you add the crowd in, more accustomed in college basketball, though. So I think both men's and women's basketball will adjust to it, but now you got to add that into it. So there's all these different factors, but I think the biggest factor is that teams will know each other. It's not just Rhode Island. I think it's everybody naturally going to know each other a little bit better or back to what they normally would because they get a full off season to kind of work through the kinks.
That's a great point, honestly. Just taking into effect of the timeline of everything that happened with COVID, and then also on top of that, the fans, because obviously the fan energy is what the players feed off of, and you want to feed the star talent, and they're really there when the fans are, behind them, the Rhody
Sure.
ruckus. So we got a glimpse of that a little bit the other night against JWU. We saw a little bit of what we're getting from Sebastian Thomas. So I want to bring up Hendrick Guy. Had him on the podcast. He was expected to redshirt, I believe. Now he's expected to play this season. So that's great. Then you have the 3 guards in Ish El-Amin, Jeremy Shepard, and Leggett, which is different compared to what they did because you had Fats Russell and Shepard, and then you had either Betran or Malik Martin at the 3, and then either Walker and one of the Mitchell twins at the 4 or the 5. So that's a different look too. I think getting a different look is also another great thing. And I'm loving the front court as well, as I just mentioned or I just alluded to, with Malik Martin, Antoine Walker, and then hopefully a full year of both these Mitchell twins. So, with all of the players I've just named, Sebastian Thomas, a couple of the freshmen that are coming, Trace Berry and Alan Betran haven't played yet. They're dealing with injuries. But we're starting to see AFOA, a couple of new players that we didn't see last year, as well as some of the freshmen, and all these different kind of new pieces that are really showing up. With all of those players, who has really stood out to you in that matter? And who are you just most excited about watching this season?
I'm really excited to see Ish El-Amin, Ish Leggett, and Jeremy Shepard all out there at the court at the same time. And I think, and now I want to preface this because I don't want people to get confused here. I'm not saying this team has 2018 Rhode Island written all over it, where we're going to be a top 25 team. I got to wait to see how things go. But, if you look back at some of those really good teams in Dan Hurley's last couple seasons here, they were really 2 bigs and then 3 guards out there. And the 2016 team really emulated that. It was Karan Iverson and Hassan Martin out there. And then you had 3 guards, whether it was Jarvis Garrett, E.C. Matthews, and Jared Terrell, or Jeff Doughton, E.C. Matthews, and Jared Terrell. You had 3 guys that could handle the ball and then 2 bigs. I really like that look this year. But I also like that because what it does for the bench. What it does for the bench is now your first man off the bench is Antoine Walker, who is a stud. The kid is energized. He's eager. And he's a tough player, man. He's just a really good post presence. And then you add Malik Martin, who can come off the bench now, right? And it's not that I don't want those guys in the starting lineup. It just does something different to your team where you can have 2 really good, reliable players off the bench. Granted, it was against Johnson and Wales, but I even think there's a spot. Jalen Carey left a lot of bad taste in people's mouths last year because he had some problems handling the ball. But I think you even take a little bit of load off of him by not having him as a starter right off the bat, right? His role is going to change. And there's a ton of different other pieces in there as well. But Sebastian Thomas now will find himself in the mix, right? And a couple other true freshmen or red shirts and whatnot. What it does, though, is it changes the dynamic, right? To have 3 guards and 2 forwards out there leaves you with a little bit of wiggle room off your bench. And ideally, with a guy like Leggett, who might not have all the experience in the world, but now is found himself in a starting role, and then 2 guys like El-Amin and Shepard that are both veteran ball handlers, that I think is going to, I think there's a recipe for this team to be really successful. And I think the A10 as a whole, I think, Richmond, St. Bonaventure's in its league of its own right now to start the year. I think those two are at the top. But I really think, especially with some of the injuries that St. Louis has had, I think, 3 through 7, 3 through 8, there can be a lot of crossover there. So what's going to really help Rhode Island this year is that if they can win road games, right, and they can take care of business at home, but if they can win those road games that are toss-ups, not necessarily those road games where the team is by far better than you, but if you can win those UMass road games, those VCU road games, right, those Dayton road games, that's going to really, really, and what helps there is experience, and I think they have that certainly in their backcourt.
I think that's what's going to make the difference too, because we saw, when we faced St. Joe's or UMass or one of those teams on the road last year, how close of a game it was, almost losing to Fordham. I mean, those are the kinds of games you can't be losing or dropping. And that's really what led to what happened. But like you just mentioned, we come in ranked 7th in the Atlantic 10, the preseason poll. You kind of just preface this, but do you think they can prove the rest of the conference wrong? I mean, obviously, St. Bonaventure is, like you just said, in a league of its own. Richmond with pretty much all of, I think they're bringing back like 6. I think they have like 6 grad seniors. It's ridiculous. And then St. Louis, which I think now they could actually be because Hassan French and Jordan Goodwin are gone, and now Javante Perkins is out for the year. So really, with those two teams, they come in 7th. I mean, I think they could potentially prove the conference wrong, finish a top 5 team. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, last year was a really good example of this, right? Because the season didn't go Rhode Island's way. But if you look at 2 of their conference wins, I mean, they beat St. Bonaventure and they beat VCU. VCU went on to the NCAA tournament, and St. Bonaventure now is the preseason pick to win the damn thing. I mean, what I think right now, again, is those road games. And it's also kind of how you can stack wins together, right? We saw this in that before COVID screwed everything up in 2020, but we saw Rhode Island really get in a rhythm, right? I think they won 9 straight. So they lose the opener in the A10 to Richmond, and then they somehow piece together this win streak, which includes a road win at VCU. I mean, you got to start to stack these wins up, and that'll come later in the season. But I think there's room for Rhode Island to be higher than 7. I do, and I think it comes down to if you can beat those teams. I mean, hey, I'll take a win over VCU and St. Bonaventure, and I think the morale is they can beat those teams. I'm saying just from the outside looking in, if you can beat those 3 through 6 teams, that's where you're going to start to catch some momentum. So the middle of that A10 slate is where we'll really start to see, obviously, this come into fruition, but also we'll be able to see how they perform on the road and if this is something that they might be able to find themselves with a double bye in the A10 tournament.
And with the exciting A10 matchups that you just mentioned to play, as well as the non-conference games, and of course the PC game, can't not talk about how that's going to be returning. We won't talk about how they dodged that bullet last year, but it's returning to the dunk this year. The rivalry, what games or rivalries are you most looking forward to? Or really, I guess to rephrase the question, which games are most important, that they have circled around? I feel like PC is always a game they always have circled on their schedule, but what other games are kind of the make or break ones that are going to be so important to the success of this team?
I think I'm thinking to myself, what's the first game that comes to mind? And to be honest with you, it's not the PC game. I mean, I love that as a fan. I do. And road wise, it's really fun too. I mean, I love going to the dunk. I love seeing that game. I'm from Warwick. I'm from Rhode Island. It's an important game. But when you said, what games stick out, the first one that came to mind is the December 30th game against Dayton. And again, you talk about one of those games that's those middle teams in the A10. Dayton, Rhode Island already, and I think Dayton was picked 5th and Rhode Island 7th. So you start conference play right after right before the holidays are over, right? So the Ryan Center you won't have your students, but to have that day before New Year's Eve, it's almost like a weekend feel already. And to have Dayton coming to town, that's a really good game to not only get your feet wet, but to make a statement, right? You welcome Dayton at home. You can start off 1-0. I mean, those are all the things that everybody wants, right? But by that point in the season, you should be able to know your identity pretty well, right? You normally find your identity out within the first couple weeks. So by the time that first conference game rolls around, that's an important game. That's an important game to win because if you get obviously, and this happens in all sports, right? The wins later on in the season end up being the ones that you point fingers at because you sit there and you go, oh, wow, we really needed that one. Or, wow, big win, we finally got that one. But if you start off 1-0, that's just as important as winning your last game, right? So to get a win there, I think that's one that comes to mind. I'd have to go back in and look extensively at the schedule. But St. Louis is going to be another big one, especially with some of the injuries they've had. And your shots at those big teams matter. I mean, you're going to play Richmond, you're going to play St. Bonaventure. Those games are important too. And St. Bonaventure, they're really good because it's the same team they've had now for 4 years, right? So they've improved, but now Rhode Island's familiar with them, right? They've played them in that same core with Oshun Oshuni and Kyle Lofton and 6 other names, I'm sure, right? At the A10 tournament back in 2019. Now these guys have grown, right? So they're legit. I'm not taking anything away from them. I'm just saying Rhode Island beat them last year. There's a chance there where I'm sure Rhode Island's going to chip on their shoulder thinking, this is a team that we beat before, right? They come into this season preseason ranked and all the stories that come with it, but now they get to go on the hunt and try to get one of those big wins, and I think those are games that have to be looked at too.
It's interesting. I saw that was the last question I have, but it was interesting that I saw. I want to say it was the last 6 or 7 years, the favorite to win the Atlantic 10 did not win. Last year, I believe it was St. Louis, but of course I think it was St. Louis. It was either St. Louis or Richmond. They didn't win. St. Bonaventure won. So it's interesting because that's kind of just the beauty of college basketball. Really, anything could happen. And like you said, I think Rhode Island has a chip on their shoulder going into some of these big matchups. I mean, St. Bonaventure's ranked number 23, and their coach Mark Schmidt's great. But if we really, what was that?
Stud. He's a stud, man. I mean, the coaching in this league, we go on and on about that, but yeah,
I mean,
100%.
St. Louis, Travis Ford, all these coaches are really great, but if Coach Cox can really just utilize the players that we were mentioning before off the bench and then some of the starters the right way, and I think, again, we'll start to see that in some of these non-conference games, I think there is a chance that we could beat them and, again, be a top 5. I think we will finish above 7 at the end of the year.
I mean, again, it's the middle of the A10, right? The middle of the A10 is really where, not make or break, but that's where you're going to separate yourself. If you can win those core games, if you don't get tripped up by the bottom of the conference, you can even afford a couple losses to the guys at the top of the conference. But those middle ground games, right? And that's the difference between being 11-7 and 12-6, or 12-6 and 13-5. I mean, again, that's why all these games matter. And again, naturally, as a fan, as a human, you put emphasis on the games later on in the season because that's when it's crunch time and you're trying to get your resume in order. But it's kind of like taking an internship as a freshman, right? If you're going to put it on your resume by the time you're a senior, it still matters when you're a freshman doing it. It doesn't matter that you get 4 years older. So they got to be able to stack up some wins in the middle of that A10 schedule, and I think they'll be more than capable of doing that. Absolutely.
Stone, thanks so much for joining me. Best of luck this season. I'm sure you're going to be calling a lot of games. I'll be in the Ryan Center. I'll probably see you a lot. I'm doing play-by-play actually Tuesday for Boston University on WRIU. So I'll be seeing you a lot. I'm sure we'll have a lot of these conversations as the season goes on. And of course, go Rhody.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gassed up this week. I'm booked to the max. I did men's soccer last night. I had men's basketball Tuesday. I have men's and women's basketball Friday. I got football on Saturday. And I got women's basketball again on Sunday. So I'm all over the place. I'm amped though. I mean, you live for this time of year, and
absolutely,
to be at Rhode Island is and hey, we got fans back. I mean, this is great. So Adam, thanks so much for having me again, and best of luck this season with your calls, and I look forward to catching up with you.
Thanks so much. Before you go, can you hit us with we'll see you around town?
A good day to be a Ram. All right. I'll see you guys around town.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
You got it. Take care, man.
Price I want for sure, you gon' need 3 promoters. I got the body from Jim Ellis, but I had switched the motor. I got these badass bitch running around this bitch named all the coders. I just told her make a story. I just bought all the Trojans.